out to me on like a Monday, they'd be like, do you want to interview within this week? And so just letting you know, especially if it's an online interview, like you never know what to expect. So I think I interviewed, hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Georgia K. I am a first year history PhD student at Brown University. And today I wanted to share all about how to prepare for your PhD interview, what to expect. I know that as a first generation student, I truly did not know what I was getting myself into when I had my very first PhD interview. And now I feel like such a seasoned professional, if you will, in this whole graduate admission thing. So I figured I would share just all about how to get through this, especially if you are someone who just got an email or just got notified that you'll be doing an interview. First of all, congratulations to you. That is a very big deal. I remember how I felt when I got mine. So yeah, so I just want to share with you guys and just really talk about this whole PhD interview season and how to get through it. Okay. So first I want to talk about what is a PhD interview. I think an interview, that usually means that you're pulled from some sort of shortlist, or the program has looked through their general applicants and they've decided on a pool of applicants that they're seriously interested in, and they want to get to know more so that they can make make a shorter list and actually make a choice for their future cohort. And the cohort is just the incoming class for that year. So if you get an interview, it typically means that there are people in the department who might want to work with you. I'm not fully sure how it works if you're in a STEM-based program, because I know that they do those based on like labs and PIs and stuff. But for all my humanities, social science people, if you list a few people on your application, if those people are interested in working with you, and typically there's like an abundance of people who apply to that program, then they might do an interview. So the interview can be whether in person or online, and personally my interview was online, but I'll go into that later. But it can be in person, online, and if it is in person, then obviously you'll have to travel there, and that is an opportunity to see the campus. And I personally feel like if it's an in-person interview, that is actually a very good sign, because they have to, I mean, in some cases they'll pay for you to go there, which I think they should. I know that they don't always do that, but it's an opportunity to see the campus, and it is like a bigger logistical nightmare to do. So I feel like most programs do online, especially post-COVID. So you can expect either an in-person or online interview, and usually the interview will be with people within the department that you want to work with. So if you're English and you're applying for like an English PhD or English master's program, then they'll have people from that department interview you. There might be someone there from like the graduate school, but generally it is like how you would expect a job interview to be, except it's going to obviously be focused on PhD specific questions, PhD specific skills. So in terms of like when you should be notified, I think this is the biggest thing that people stress about, especially I know I did, because I knew people who got interviews early January, and I was like, what the heck, I had not heard back from any of my schools. I do think it varies, so you might hear back as early as December, which I think is extremely early, especially considering that most programs, you don't actually submit your application until the end of December. So you might hear back end of December, January, February, and maybe even March, depending on how quickly the program is hoping to get back to people. But typically late January, early February is when you will get most of your PhD interview offers. And I will say a big note for, especially if you're watching this video, like anticipating some sort of interview, or you've already gotten an interview, not every program interviews, and not getting an interview is not an indication of whether or not you've gotten in. I will say for me, I applied to 9 programs and I interviewed for 1 school, and I got into 4 of them. So don't worry if you don't get an interview. Like, it really depends on the school and it depends on the department. So for the school that I interviewed for, it was the University of Pennsylvania, and that was the only school in all the history departments that interviewed anyone, and yet, as I said, I got into multiple programs. So it's really like, don't worry about it, don't stress about it if you don't get an interview. But if you do get an interview, obviously you want to know what to expect. So yeah, so that's a good segue for me to briefly explain what my PhD experience was like, if anyone is actually wondering like what it feels like. If you want to see, I actually have a video, a TikTok that I filmed when I was like preparing for that interview. I think it's really cool. So if you want to like actually see that, it's gonna be pinned on my TikTok. But generally, as I said, I interviewed for the University of Pennsylvania. That was the only school out of 9 programs that I applied to. I heard back from them very early February, and that was around the time that I was actually starting to get acceptances from other schools. So the timeline for applications is just all over the place. But I got the interview, and they gave me within a few days to set up a time. So I think they might have, say they reached out to me on like a Monday, they'd be like, do you want to interview within this week? And so just letting you know, especially if it's an online interview, like you never know what to expect. So I think I interviewed the very beginning of the following week that they had reached out to me. And for that interview, it was essentially with a few people from the department who I had actually listed that I wanted to work with. I didn't know, they didn't specify how many people I'd be interviewing with. I assumed it would be one person, but it was multiple people. And it was actually really, really conversational, a lot less formal. And I think a lot of people can say that for their interview experiences, is that don't go into it expecting like a really formal like question and answer type situation. It's much more conversational, especially if you answer it right. It should be conversational. It shouldn't be like, what is your research, and you just sort of give them like a little spiel or whatever. It needs to be like a conversation about how you would work with them and how they could help you as a student. A lot of things that I thought I was gonna get asked, I did not. So I had a huge, like not a huge, but I had an elevator pitch and all of that prepared. I didn't really need any of that. The only thing I really did need was to know my research like thoroughly, because I did get a lot of specific questions about my research and about sort of like the methodologies that I wanted to use and how I was thinking through the project and things like that. And I think especially for PhD interviews, you should expect more of that, where it's like more so them sort of gauging you as a professional and thinking about how you can facilitate a future project. And I think this is sort of like the thread that ties all PhD programs together, is that whether you're going to be working with PI or an advisor, they're going to be looking for how can you sustainably do a project, and what projects have you done in the past that could show that you could do that. So I definitely, like, my interview experience was very fun, very cool. And once I had interviewed for them, I got my acceptance to the University of Pennsylvania a few days later, I would say, like less than a week later, maybe like less than 5 days later. I do think that turnaround time differs per program. Some programs, I feel like they'll get back to you super soon, and I feel like that was relatively soon, but I know that sometimes it can take a few weeks depending on how many people they actually interviewed. I do feel like they didn't interview that many people for the program. They probably had like a shorter list, so I think if it's less people, then you should be hearing back relatively soon. But with all of these like timelines in mind, I would just not stress it, because at the end of the day, like, the programs, they might have an ideal timeline, but things might get thrown around, or they might have more people that they're interested in, less people that they're interested in. It depends on the applicant pool for that year. And so much of this PhD program is luck. It's like, when did you submit? Who was having a good day? Like, you just never know. So I would just like give yourself a lot of grace in that. But yeah, if you guys have any specific questions about my interview process with Penn, then you should leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, so the very first thing I would recommend to do if you got a PhD interview is to reread all your application materials. I think if you don't take anything away from this video, that's the #1 thing that you should do, because you will more than likely get questions about maybe specific things that you mentioned in your statement of purpose or your diversity statement or whatever, but you might also get questions about research statement and all this stuff. So I would just say, like, reread every single document that you submitted for the specific school that you will be interviewing for, so that you kind of have an idea of what you said, and also maybe what you didn't say, like what you didn't have enough space to say. Because if we all know, like, if you're applying for a program, the writing, the word limit is usually so small that you can't even include everything. So there's probably things that you want to add on to, and this interview would be a great space to do that. So I just made sure that I sat down a few days before my interview. I reread all my statements and actually like annotated it and like took notes and said, okay, I recognize that I said this here, but I want to like explain more, or I want to reiterate that they know that this is what is like central to my project or whatever like that. And so go ahead, reread all those statements and make sure that you're well versed. #2, and this is sort of based on my own experience, I would say to know why you're doing the project that you're doing and sort of stick to your guns. And I actually had a conversation with one of my advisors about this, about some graduate programs will, especially in an interview, try to see if you are flexible or inflexible in the type of project that you want to do. And I don't think there is a right or a wrong way to like answer these questions, but I do think you have to sort of, if you are proposing an idea, you have to know what about it is like important to you, or what about the research area that you're particularly focused on, how it's going to help people or how it's going to help the field in some way. And so even if you will change in the future, which is totally fine, you do want to at least have some sort of idea about sort of the general subfield that you're in and the impact that it can make. So in this instance, I would say like I would get a question like, oh, why did you choose this methodology? Like for me, it would be like oral history. Why did you choose oral history as like one of the main methodologies that you want to use in your research? And you have to be able to explain that and sort of like stick to your guns with that. There might be even like, would you be willing to change? And this might not be just about methodology, but even just general aspects of your research of like, would you be willing to change your research in this way and that way? And I just would say like really think about it and think about what are you willing to say, oh okay, I'm open to like learning this new thing and like maybe going in that direction, versus no, I think this is the way that I want to do it. And I think in seeing that, you'll see how flexible the program is. And so I would say like stick to your guns with whatever answer, whether you are flexible or inflexible, because you will see how they react, and that will tell you if that is a place that you can actually do that research project at. And so in my instance, I saw that they were asking me about like if I was willing to look at my project from a different lens, and I was like, I'm always open to sort of expanding the lens that I look at my project through, but this is where I'm really excited at. And I think they appreciated that, because I was showing that I was somewhat flexible, but that I was really set in sort of the reason why I knew that I wanted to do my project in a specific way. So that is tip number 2, is just make sure that you are sort of just like aware of the why of your project proposal. Tip number 3, and I will say these tips are much more like mindset tips and how to like really go in and show your personality and be like a shining candidate. I'm not gonna like fully go into like how to dress and like logistics and stuff, because I feel like there's so many YouTube videos that talk about like what to wear and all of that stuff, and I'll probably touch on that a little bit, but I genuinely feel like it is how you bring yourself to the interview that will give you the best opportunity to actually be chosen out of the plenty of people who they could have chosen for like their incoming cohort. So the next thing is to be authentic. And when I say be authentic, I mean, don't try to project this idea of an ideal PhD student or someone you think they want, because at the end of the day, like you don't know what they want. So you might be projecting the wrong image. So the best bet is to just go with whatever you feel like is more natural, more comfortable to you. Like obviously you want to be well prepared. I think at the basis of it, be well prepared on the faculty that you're going to try to work with, be well prepared on your own materials, be like really thoughtful about why you want to do a PhD program and why you want to do this type of project that you want to do. By the end of the day, if you are a more relaxed person, if you are super organized, if you're all of these things, like bring out the most authentic versions of yourself. So I think one of my questions in my interview was like, how am I gonna basically manage my time in graduate school? And I am like a super hyper organized person, and so I was just like, listen, I have like my Google Calendar and I use a bullet journal system, and these are how I sort of like make sense of everything, because I do occasionally get anxious because I'm an anxious person, and I wasn't like trying to hide that. I wasn't trying to be like, oh, I'm a cool graduate student and I always have my shit together, because no, that's not me. And so I was leading with sort of like my own working style as a graduate student and just being really honest about that. And I think that helped to just be like, I'm not gonna say that I'm gonna be perfectly cool in this program, but I will try my best to stay on top of everything, and that helps. And I also think I was very forthcoming about sort of like being a Black woman in academia, and I feel like some people are sort of like, oh, should you not? I personally do not care. This is my lived experience, and if I feel like it's going to impact my programming some way, then I will talk about that. Just like what are the supports for people who are coming from backgrounds that are not traditionally represented. And I'm a Black woman who's doing a project about African American history, and so I want to make sure that I'm going to be in a department that's going to be supportive of that. And so I was just like bring my entire self into the interview. And I think that like there was no one else who could like do it the way I would do it. And I just say like, please just don't try to project what you think they want. Just be who you are and lean into the parts of you that are, I guess, unique, or just the parts of you that you feel like are non-negotiable for how you're going to show up in that program. And in doing that, touching a little bit on like dressing and stuff, I feel like you should dress in a way that feels most authentic to you. I know that there's a lot of students, especially students who have varying like styles and interests, and even if you're thinking about people of color and how you do your hair and stuff like that, because for me, I decided to go with like my natural hair, and I was like, this is how I'm rocking it, this is how it's gonna look. And I know that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, because a lot of people don't feel comfortable showing up as themselves in that way, or even if you are a gender non-conforming person and you want to dress in a certain way, I feel like, especially as we're moving into a new era where a lot more people are becoming cognizant of sort of like the disadvantages and how people have been marginalized in academia, I feel like this is the perfect time to show up as your full self and be like unapologetic about it. So obviously you want to think about how you're going to negotiate that, because for some people they feel like that might get them disqualified. I personally feel like if you show up in that way, obviously I can't speak to everyone's experience, but if you show up authentically and you sort of like show yourself as like a best candidate, then that should not be a really integral factor to their decision making. If anything, I think it should add to sort of like, oh, this person is going to bring in a different perspective, or this person is going to make our cohort like a better cohort because they have a different background. And so I would just say lean into it. If you're a person of color, if you're a person who is gender non-conforming, or you dress a certain way, like however you feel most comfortable, show up that way, and the program, they'll adjust. My last tip, I would say read the news about your subfield, be up to date on what's happening. So I'm just very thankful that I did this, because you never know what questions you're gonna get about, oh, have you seen this person's work who is up and coming in your field? For me, that would be like African American labor history. And I was very fortunate in that I actually went ahead and I was like looking up like the new releases for books and articles and stuff. And obviously you won't know every single thing, and if you don't in an interview, you can be like, oh no, I actually haven't heard of that thing, but I'm definitely willing to check it out if it is related to my work, or if it's not related to your work. But yeah, I think the best thing is if they catch you and they're like, oh, have you seen this person's work? It actually like might be interesting for you, and you're like, oh yeah, I actually did know that. I saw that and I was like really interested by it or whatever. So I just feel like it's the little things that really get you ahead. So read, keep up, and I feel like just generally as a graduate student, that's good to do. Keep up with your field, keep up with your subfield. I feel like your subfield is perhaps the most important, because you can't keep up with everything in the field, like especially if like someone like me, I do history, I can't keep up with everything in Italian Renaissance and people who study the Arctic or whatever. So I really try to keep up on the news and the current people who are up and coming in the subfield of African American history or African American labor history. So do what you can, and I think that will help. So yeah, so that is how to prepare for your PhD interview. I hope these tips are somewhat helpful, and I hope that if you are gonna have your interview upcoming, that you are gonna do a great job and that you will get the acceptance that you are waiting for. I am rooting for you. This PhD process is a lot of work, but if you're at this stage where you're waiting for an interview or you're doing your interview, you're already towards the end of it. So just good luck. I hope that everything works out for you, and please let me know if you have any questions or if there are any sorts of videos that you want to see from me, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.